The eviction notice landed on the kitchen table right between the turkey and the mashed potatoes. Thanksgiving morning, and my brother Dean decided this was the perfect time to destroy me. His smirk made my stomach turn as he slid the papers across the same wooden surface our father had built with his own hands 40 years ago. "It's nothing personal, sis," Dean said, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. Which, according to his forged documents, he believed he did. "Just business. You can't handle this property alone, and I've got buyers lined up. Real money, Martha. More than this old farm's ever seen." My hand trembled as I picked up the notice. 62 years old, and I was being kicked out of the house where I was born. The same house where I'd nursed our mother through cancer. The same kitchen where I'd sat with our father during his final days, promising him I'd protect this land. Dean's wife, Patricia, wouldn't even look at me. Their grown son, Kyle, stared at his plate. The rest of the family sat frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. I said nothing. What could I say that wouldn't break me completely? That night, I sat alone in the dark kitchen. Everyone had left after Dean's announcement. Appetites ruined, the holiday destroyed. Empty dishes surrounded me like ghosts of better times. I could almost hear Mom's laugh, Dad's stories about working this land through the Dust Bowl years. Dean's truck headlights had faded hours ago, but I could still see his satisfied grin burned into my memory. He'd waited until our parents were gone to make his move. Convenient timing. No one left to call him out except me. And who would believe the spinster sister over the successful businessman? I pressed my palms against the table, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingers. Dad had carved our initials into the underside when we were kids. Mine were still there. Dean's too. Back when we were family. Back when blood meant something more than dollar signs. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. Not yet. Not while Dean thought he'd won. Something flickered inside me then. Not quite anger. Not quite hope. Just a small, stubborn flame that refused to go out. The next morning, I started with Dad's old roll-top desk in the study. He'd kept everything there. Bills, letters, receipts going back decades. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Just something. Anything that might explain how Dean had managed to claim ownership. 3 hours in, I found Dad's will. The real one, not the version Dean had filed with the county. I spread both documents side by side on the desk, comparing every line, every word. My heart stopped when I reached the signature page. Dad had always signed his name with a flourish. A bold, sweeping C in Callahan, then a confident stroke through the rest. I'd watched him sign documents my entire life. This signature was different. Rushed. Uneven. The letters cramped together like someone had been nervous. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of both signatures. Then I photographed every page of both wills. The differences were subtle, but they were there. Dad's real will left the farm to both of us, with strict instructions that it could never be sold or demolished. Dean's version had no such restrictions. Someone had changed Dad's will, and I had a pretty good idea who. I needed to understand Dean's plan, so I drove to the county planning office. The clerk was busy with another customer, so I waited near the bulletin board, pretending to read notices about zoning changes and building permits. That's when I heard Dean's voice. He was in the back office laughing with someone. I moved closer, staying out of sight behind a tall filing cabinet. "The old place will be gone by spring," Dean was saying. "Got a developer ready to turn it into a luxury vineyard. High-end wine tours, wedding venue, the whole package. We're talking millions, Carl. Absolute millions." The other man, Carl, chuckled. "What about your sister? Martha?" Dean's voice dripped with contempt. "She'll be fine. I'm giving her 2 weeks to clear out. More than generous, considering she's been living there rent-free for decades while I built my real estate empire." My hands clenched into fists. Rent-free. As if caring for our dying parents was a vacation. As if maintaining 200 acres was a hobby. I left before they could see me, but I'd heard enough. This wasn't about the farm. It was about Dean's greed. Old Vernon Lyle stopped by that afternoon. He owned the neighboring property and had known our family for 50 years. His weathered face was grave as he stood on my porch, hat in his hands. "Martha, I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "Dean's been selling off your equipment. Saw him load your father's tractor onto a flatbed truck yesterday. The livestock too. He's already got buyers lined up." My stomach dropped. "But the eviction doesn't take effect for 2 weeks. Vernon shook his head. "He's stripping the place bare before you can stop him. I tried to call the sheriff, but Dean's got paperwork showing he owns everything. Says he's within his rights." I invited Vernon inside for coffee, and he told me everything he'd witnessed. Dean had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every time I'd been in town buying supplies or visiting the feed store, Dean had been here, cataloging assets, taking measurements, meeting with contractors. "Your daddy would be heartbroken," Vernon said softly. This land meant everything to him. After he left, I stood in the barn, looking at the empty spaces where equipment should have been. Dean wasn't just taking the farm. He was erasing our family's entire history, piece by piece. But I wasn't beaten yet. The attic was my next stop. I hadn't been up there in years, not since Mom passed. Too many memories packed into cardboard boxes and old trunks. But if there were answers anywhere, they'd be here. I found it tucked inside an old hatbox, beneath Mom's wedding veil. A sealed envelope, yellowed with age, with my name written across the front in Dad's careful handwriting. "For Martha, if I'm gone." My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. "Martha," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm not there to protect what we built. Your brother has always been ambitious, sometimes too much. But you understand what this land means. It's not just dirt and buildings. It's our promise to the future. Don't let anyone sell what's meant to last. The land keeps our promise. The key opens what you need. Trust yourself. Love, Dad." I held the brass key up to the light. It was old, tarnished, with strange markings I didn't recognize. What did it open? I'd never seen a lock on the property that matched this key. Then I remembered. The old barn. The section of floorboards Dad had always told us never to disturb. The barn was dark and cold. I hadn't spent much time here since Dad died. Too painful. But now I moved through it with purpose, counting boards from the east wall like I'd seen Dad do once when I was young. 15 boards in, I found it. A small brass lock plate, nearly invisible beneath decades of dust and hay. My heart pounded as I inserted the key. It turned with a soft click. I pulled up the board, revealing a hidden hatch beneath. The hinges were old but well-oiled, as if Dad had maintained them even in his final years. Below the hatch, wooden steps descended into darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down carefully. The air was cool and dry, preserved somehow. At the bottom, I found myself in a sealed root cellar I'd never known existed. My flashlight beam swept across the space. Wooden chests lined the walls. Old farming tools hung from hooks. And in the center, on a makeshift table, sat a leather-bound ledger and a stack of official-looking documents. I opened the ledger with trembling hands. The first page was dated 1935, written in my grandfather's flowing script. Record of Callahan Family Farm Holdings. This was more than just a hidden room. This was our family's secret history. I spent the next 4 hours in that cellar, reading by flashlight. The documents told an incredible story. My grandfather had been more than just a farmer. During the Depression, he'd bought up struggling properties around the county, holding them for families who couldn't pay taxes, then selling them back for pennies when times improved. He'd been a quiet hero, and these papers proved it. But there was something even more important buried in the documents. A legal covenant my father had registered with the county in 1985, titled Historical Preservation Agreement. I read it twice to make sure I understood. The agreement stated that the Callahan family farm could never be sold for development or demolished for commercial purposes. Any attempt to do so would immediately void the current owner's claim and transfer full ownership to the caretaker acting in good faith. That was me. I'd been the caretaker for the past 15 years. Among the papers I found something else. A copy of Dad's real will, with his actual signature, witnessed and notarized properly. And beneath it, a private investigator's report dated 2 months before Dad's death. He'd suspected Dean was planning something and had hired someone to document everything. The report detailed Dean's meetings with developers, his secret property assessments, even photographs of him surveying the land with contractors while Dad was still alive. My father had known. He'd known and prepared for this exact moment. Dean showed up the next morning, all false charm and big smiles. He knocked twice, then walked right in without waiting for an answer. That's how he operated now. Like he already owned everything. "Just checking in, sis," he said, looking around the kitchen like he was appraising it for auction. "Making sure you're packing. 2 weeks goes fast, you know." I watched him from my chair, saying nothing. Let him talk. Let him show me exactly who he'd become. "Patricia and I were thinking," he continued, opening the refrigerator and helping himself to juice. "You might need help with the move. Cal could probably spare a weekend. We'll get you into a nice apartment in town. Something manageable for a woman your age." A woman my age. Like I was ancient and helpless. He walked through the living room, his muddy boots tracking dirt across Mom's braided rug. Then he headed toward the barn, probably to check if there was anything else worth stealing. I watched him walk directly over the floorboards that hid the cellar entrance. He had no idea what he was standing on. No idea that his entire scheme was already unraveling beneath his feet. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Dean was standing on top of his own downfall, too arrogant to even notice. Monday morning, I drove to the county courthouse with my father's original documents tucked safely in my bag. The clerk, an older woman named Donna who'd known our family for years, looked up when I approached her desk. "Martha Callahan," she said warmly. "Haven't seen you in ages. How are you holding up?" I spread Dad's preservation covenant across her desk. "I need you to verify something for me. My father registered this document in 1985. Is it still valid?" Donna adjusted her glasses and read carefully. Her eyebrows rose. "Oh my. Yes, this is absolutely valid. It's on file and has never been rescinded. Any property transaction violating these terms would be automatically voided." My heart soared. What about the ownership documents my brother filed? The ones giving him full control. She pulled up Dean's filing on her computer, frowning as she read. "The signature on these looks questionable. But technically, without proof of forgery, they're considered legal. However, if you can demonstrate fraud, everything your brother filed would be invalidated." What kind of proof would I need? A notarized statement from someone involved, or expert handwriting analysis? Something concrete. I thought about the notary who'd witnessed Dad's supposed signature. He was the key. The County Historical Society occupied a small brick building on Main Street. I'd never been inside, but I needed allies, and I needed them fast. The woman at the front desk directed me to an office in the back, where a young woman with bright eyes and an eager smile greeted me. "Tess Bryant," she said, shaking my hand. "I'm the county preservationist. How can I help you?" I told her everything. About the farm, about Dad's covenant, about Dean's plans to bulldoze it all for a vineyard. Tess listened with growing excitement, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "The Callahan farm," she breathed. "I've read about your family in the county archives. Your grandfather helped rebuild half the township during the Depression. This property has incredible historical significance. Can you help me protect it?" Tess smiled. "Not only can I help, but I think we can get it designated as a county historical landmark. That would make it nearly impossible for anyone to demolish or significantly alter. But I'll need documentation. Everything you can find about the property's history." I thought about the cellar full of papers beneath the barn. "I can get you documentation. Then let's make history, Tess said. Dean threw a community barbecue the following Saturday. He'd sent invitations all over town, claiming it was a celebration of new beginnings. I wasn't invited, of course, but I showed up anyway. The farm looked different with Dean's touches. Expensive catering tents, a bar serving craft cocktails. People I'd known my whole life wandering around like tourists, pointing at the fields and buildings like they were exhibits in a museum. Dean held court near the barn, handing out glossy flyers showing artist renderings of Callahan vineyards. The images showed the farmhouse demolished, replaced by a modern tasting room. The barn converted to event space. Our family's history erased for wine tours and wedding receptions. This property has so much potential, Dean told a group of investors. Been wasted on small-scale farming for too long. Time to bring it into the 21st century. I stayed on the edges, recording everything on my phone. Dean's boasts about his property, his promises to investors, his detailed plans for demolition. Every word was evidence of his intent to violate the preservation covenant. Vernon Lyle found me near the fence. Lot of folks aren't happy about this, he murmured. Dean's making enemies with all his big talk. I watched my brother, flush with imagined success, destroying our family's reputation with every arrogant word. By Monday, the town's mood had shifted. People stopped me at the grocery store, the post office, the feed supply. They remembered what the Callahan family used to mean in this community. Your father helped us keep our land during the drought of '88, one farmer told me. Dean's got no right to tear down what your family built. Even Patricia's friends were whispering. I heard it at the library, saw it in the way people's faces changed when Dean's name came up. He'd overplayed his hand. His greed had made him a pariah. Meanwhile, I worked quietly. No grand speeches, no social media posts, just steady, careful action. Meeting with Tess, organizing documents, building my case brick by brick. Vernon organized a small group of neighboring farmers to help me maintain the property. They showed up at dawn, fixing fences Dean had let fall apart, repairing equipment he hadn't bothered to steal. Acts of quiet rebellion that spoke louder than any protest. The community was rallying, and Dean didn't even notice. He was too busy courting investors and planning his empire. His arrogance would be his downfall. To make sure of it, Tess called me Tuesday afternoon, her voice electric with excitement. Martha, you need to come to my office right now. I found something in your father's covenant that changes everything. I drove straight there. Tess had documents spread across her entire desk, colored tabs marking important sections. Look at Clause 17, she said, pointing. Right here. If any owner attempts to sell or demolish the property in violation of preservation terms, ownership automatically transfers to the caretaker in good faith. That's you, Martha. You've been maintaining the property for 15 years. My hands trembled as I read the clause. So if Dean tries to sell to developers, the farm becomes legally yours. Completely. He loses all claim. Tess grinned. Your father was a genius. He built in a failsafe that would protect the property even after he was gone. But we still need to prove Dean's planning to violate the covenant. We have his barbecue videos, the flyers, multiple witnesses to his statements about demolition. That's enough for a preliminary injunction. She pulled out another document. And I filed an application for historical landmark status. The committee meets next week. Everything was falling into place. But I still needed one more piece of evidence. Proof that Dean had forged Dad's will in the first place. I knew exactly where to find it. The notary's office was in a strip mall on the edge of town. Howard Pemberton had been notarizing documents in this county for 35 years. He was the one whose stamp appeared on Dean's version of Dad's will. I found him eating lunch at his desk, a sad sandwich and a can of soda. He looked up when I knocked, and something flickered in his eyes. Guilt maybe, or fear. Martha Callahan, he said quietly. I wondered when you'd come. I sat down across from him. You notarized my father's will 3 years ago. The day before he died. Howard's face crumpled. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Tell me what happened. The story spilled out of him like a confession at church. Dean had come to him with the will already signed, claiming Dad was too weak to come to the office but needed the document notarized urgently. He'd paid Howard $5,000 in cash to stamp it without actually witnessing Dad's signature. I knew it was wrong, Howard said, tears in his eyes. But my daughter needed surgery, and insurance wasn't covering it. Dean said nobody would ever know. Said your father was dying anyway and it didn't matter. I've regretted it every single day since. I pulled out a legal pad. I need you to write down everything you just told me. Every detail. And I need it notarized by another notary. Howard nodded, already reaching for a pen. Anything. I'll do anything to make this right. 2 hours later, I had a signed, notarized confession. The final piece of evidence I needed to destroy Dean's scheme completely. Dean found out someone was asking questions about his documents. I don't know who told him. Maybe Howard's conscience got the better of him again. Maybe someone at the courthouse mentioned my visits. Either way, Dean showed up at the farmhouse Friday evening, fury radiating off him like heat. What are you playing at, Martha? He slammed through the door without knocking, face red, veins bulging in his neck. I've got lawyers calling me about document authenticity. County clerks requesting meetings. What did you do? I stayed calm, standing in the kitchen with my arms crossed. I'm protecting what's mine. Yours. He laughed, but there was panic underneath. You've got nothing. No money. No lawyers. No case. I've already got the county's approval for development. You're wasting your time. Am I? Something in my tone made him pause. For the first time, real fear crossed his face. You can't stop this, Martha. It's already done. We'll see, I said quietly. He stared at me for a long moment, trying to read my expression. Then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I watched his truck disappear down the driveway, then I called Tess. It's time, I said. Let's end this. The developer's financing collapsed on Monday morning. I heard about it from Vernon, who heard it from someone at the bank. Apparently, Tess had sent the development company a formal letter outlining the preservation covenant and historical landmark application. Their lawyers took one look at the potential legal nightmare and pulled out immediately. No financing meant no sale. No sale meant Dean's entire scheme was crumbling. He started making frantic phone calls, trying to find new investors. But word spreads fast in a small county. Nobody wanted to touch a property tangled in legal complications and historical preservation battles. I watched Dean's carefully constructed plans fall apart piece by piece. His arrogance had made him sloppy. He'd assumed I was too old, too weak, too simple to fight back. He'd forgotten that I was Dad's daughter too. That I'd learned strategy and patience from the same man who'd survived the depression by being smarter than everyone else. Dean's partners abandoned him. His investors disappeared. And Dean, trapped in his own web of lies and greed, began to publicly unravel. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The sheriff showed up at my door Tuesday afternoon. Tom Bradley had been sheriff for 20 years and had known our family since he was a deputy. His face was serious as he stood on my porch, hat in his hands. Martha, he said, I need to ask you some questions about your brother's eviction notice. I invited him in and made coffee while he spread documents across the kitchen table. I've been reviewing Dean's paperwork, he said slowly. Something doesn't add up. The signatures, the dates, the notarization. I've seen forged documents before, and these have all the telltale signs. Pulled out my folder. Would you like to see my father's real will? And a notarized confession from the man Dean paid to stamp fake documents. Tom's eyebrows rose. He read through everything carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked up at me with something like admiration. You've been busy. Just protecting what's mine. He gathered the documents. I'm going to need to take these to the county prosecutor. If what Howard Pemberton says is true, your brother committed fraud, forgery, and possibly elder abuse. This is serious, Martha. I know, I said quietly. That's why I'm not letting him get away with it. Tom nodded. There's going to be a hearing. Probably next week. The judge will want to review everything before making any decisions about the property. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table, feeling the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just about saving the farm anymore. This was about justice. The county meeting room was packed. Seemed like half the town had shown up to watch the Callahan family drama unfold in public. Dean sat at the front with his lawyer, looking confident despite everything. He stood when called, presenting his case with practiced ease. He had documents showing his ownership. He had permits approved by various county offices. He had contracts with buyers. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. I dressed carefully that morning. Not fancy, just neat and respectable. The same way Mom used to dress for church. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. My brother's documents are built on lies. I laid out Howard Pemberton's notarized confession first. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then I presented the side-by-side comparison of Dad's signatures. The differences were obvious now that people were looking for them. Finally, I revealed Dad's preservation covenant and the investigator's report documenting Dean's schemes while our father was still alive. My father knew Dean was planning this, I said. He spent his final months protecting this farm from his own son. And I intend to honor that protection. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Blackwood, reviewed every document with meticulous care. The silence in the room was absolute. Finally she looked up. This court will issue a ruling within 48 hours. Until then, all property transactions are frozen, and Mr. Callahan's access to the property is suspended. Dean's confident expression crumbled. His lawyer tried to object, but Judge Blackwood had already moved on. I walked out of that courthouse with my head high, knowing I'd finally been heard. Judge Blackwood's ruling came down Thursday morning. I was in the barn when Tess called, breathless with excitement. Martha, we won. We won everything. The judge had issued an immediate injunction halting all sales, construction, and property transfers. Dean's fraudulent documents were officially void. More importantly, the court had frozen Dean's assets pending a criminal investigation into fraud and forgery. And there's more, Tess said. The Historical Society approved the landmark application. The Callahan farm is now officially protected. Nobody can demolish or significantly alter it without county approval, which they'll never get. I sank onto a hay bale, the phone pressed to my ear, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness this time. Tears of pure, overwhelming relief. Your father would be so proud, Tess said softly. That evening, I walked the property as the sun set, touching the fence posts Dad had built, standing in the fields he'd plowed, looking at the farmhouse where generations of Callahans had been born and raised. The land was safe. The legacy was protected. And Dean was about to face consequences he'd never imagined. My quiet patience had won against his loud greed. Strategy had triumphed over spite. And I was still standing. Dean arrived Friday morning with bulldozers. I'd been expecting something desperate, but this was beyond reckless. Two massive machines rumbled up the driveway, their diesel engines roaring, ready to tear down the barn. Dean jumped out of his truck, wild-eyed and shouting, "This is still my land. The judge doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm taking what's mine." I stood on the porch, phone in hand, watching this final collapse of my brother's sanity. Before the bulldozers could move 10 feet, two police cruisers pulled into the driveway, lights flashing. Sheriff Tom Bradley stepped out, walking calmly toward Dean with papers in his hand. "Dean Callahan, you're being served with a court order to vacate this property immediately. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings, under supervision. Any attempt to damage the property will result in immediate arrest. Dean stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. This is impossible. This is my farm. My inheritance. She can't have it. Actually, Tom said quietly, according to Judge Blackwood's ruling and the preservation covenant your father registered, this property now belongs entirely to your sister. You have no legal claim whatsoever. The bulldozer operators, sensing trouble, were already backing their machines away. Dean looked around wildly, searching for allies, finding none. Martha, he said, turning to me with desperation in his eyes. Please. We can work this out. We're family. I looked at my brother, this stranger wearing a face I once loved. You made your choice, Dean. Now live with it. The local newspaper ran the story Saturday morning. Elderly woman saves historic family farm, exposes will forgery. My phone rang constantly. Neighbors calling to congratulate me, old friends reaching out, reporters requesting interviews. I declined most of them. This wasn't about fame or vindication. It was about protection. About honoring the promise I'd made to Dad in his final days. But the attention had consequences for Dean. His real estate business started losing clients. His partners distanced themselves. The fraud charges meant bankruptcy, legal fees, and possibly prison time. Patricia filed for divorce within a week. Kyle called to apologize for not standing up to his father sooner. Dean's entire life, built on arrogance and greed, collapsed in spectacular fashion. I didn't take pleasure in his suffering. I just felt an exhausted kind of sadness. This could have all been avoided. If Dean had valued family over money. If he'd honored Dad's wishes instead of twisting them. If he'd seen me as a sister instead of an obstacle. But those weren't the choices he made. Vernon stopped by with a casserole and a smile. The whole county's talking about you, he said. About how you stood up to him. How you protected what mattered. I just did what Dad would have wanted, I said. That's exactly why everyone's so proud. Tess and I spent the next month planning the restoration. The barn needed serious work. New roof, reinforced beams, fresh paint. But the bones were solid, just like Dad had built them. Word spread and volunteers appeared. Farmers who remembered Grandpa's kindness during the Depression. Families Dad had helped during hard times. Young people from town who wanted to be part of something meaningful. They showed up with tools and supplies, working weekends and evenings. The barn slowly transformed from a weathered relic into something beautiful. Something alive again. We turned the main floor into a heritage exhibit, displaying Grandpa's ledgers, old farming tools, photographs spanning 3 generations. The story of the Callahan family, preserved for future generations. The cellar became an archive, carefully climate-controlled, storing documents that told the history of the entire county's agricultural development. It was more than restoration. It was rebirth. The grand opening attracted hundreds of people. The governor sent a letter of recognition. The Historical Society gave a speech about the importance of preserving agricultural heritage. Local school children toured the exhibits, learning about the Depression, about farming, about family legacy. I stood in the barn doorway watching it all, feeling Dad's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. This was what he'd wanted, what he'd planned for, what he'd protected. And I'd made it happen. Dean came to see me one last time in late spring. He looked smaller somehow, broken. The arrogance completely gone, replaced by something that might have been shame. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, standing on the porch like a stranger requesting entrance. I let him in, made coffee out of habit. We sat at the kitchen table in uncomfortable silence. "I'm bankrupt," he said finally. "Legal fees, restitution to the estate, Patricia's divorce settlement. I'm losing everything." I said nothing. What was there to say? I wanted to apologize. The words seemed to cause him physical pain. For everything. For being greedy. For trying to steal what was yours. For dishonoring Dad's memory. He looked up, eyes red. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I'm sorry. I studied my brother's face, looking for the boy I'd grown up with. Somewhere under the wreckage, maybe he was still there. Dad loved you, I said quietly. Even knowing what you were planning, he loved you. That's why he set up safeguards. Not to punish you, but to protect you from yourself. Dean's face crumpled. I threw it all away. For money I didn't even need. For pride that wasn't worth having. Yes, I said. You did. He stood to leave, shoulders hunched with defeat. At the door he turned back. The farm looks beautiful. Dad would be proud of what you've done. I know, I said. I watched him drive away for what I knew would be the last time. There was no satisfaction in his downfall. Just a deep, profound sadness for what could have been. But I'd learned something important. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. You can only protect what matters and hope the rest falls into place. Summer arrived with golden light and warm breezes. I spent my mornings working in the garden, my afternoons giving tours at the heritage barn, my evenings sitting on the porch watching fireflies dance over the fields. The farm was thriving. The historical landmark designation brought visitors from across the state. School groups, historical societies, families wanting to understand what rural life used to be like. But more importantly, it brought community. Neighbors gathered for seasonal events. Local farmers used the barn for meetings and planning sessions. Young people started internship programs, learning traditional farming methods and agricultural history. The land was giving back just like Dad always said it would. One evening, I found one last letter tucked inside an old seed box in the barn. I recognized Dad's handwriting immediately, though the paper was yellowed with age. Martha, it read. If you're reading this, you did right by the land. You protected what needed protecting. You stood strong when it would have been easier to fold. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Always have been. Let the land give back to those who believed in it. That's the Callahan way. Love always, Dad. I sat in the barn doorway as the sun set over golden fields, that letter pressed to my heart, tears streaming down my face. The farm was safe. The legacy was secure. And I'd honored every promise I'd made. Dean had tried to take everything. Instead, he'd lost it all. And I discovered that the greatest inheritance isn't property or money. It's integrity. It's standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. The land stretched out before me, bathed in evening light, alive with possibility and promise. 3 generations of Callahans had worked this soil, loved this place, protected it for the future. Now it would endure for generations more. And that was worth every fight, every tear, every moment of doubt. One. Not through aggression or revenge, but through patience, truth, and quiet, unshakable determination. The land keeps our promise. Just like Dad said it would.